The first sound to pierce the self-imposed silence was the click of a stiletto against polished marble, a sound as sharp and artificial as the woman who made it. Kazuo, a man whose empire was built on anticipating every move, lay perfectly still, a willing prisoner in the fortress of his own body. The world believed him to be in a coma, a victim of a brutal car crash that had been anything but accidental. But beneath the still eyelids, his mind was a storm of cold, watchful calculation. This hospital suite, with its minimalist decor and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawling Tokyo skyline, was not a recovery room. It was a courtroom, and he was the silent judge. His fiancée, Hannah, glided into his line of sight, a slash of crimson silk against the sterile white of the room. She was a masterpiece of curated beauty, every hair in place, her face a mask of tragic sorrow. "Oh, Kazuo, my love," she whispered, her voice a carefully rehearsed melody of grief. She took his hand, her manicured fingers cool and dry against his skin. There was no warmth, no life, only the hard press of the enormous diamond he had placed on her finger. "The doctors say there is no change. But I will not leave your side. I will be here, always, always." The word echoed in the silent chamber of his mind. He had built his life on loyalty, demanding it with an iron will, rewarding it with lavish generosity, and punishing its absence with terrifying finality. He had believed Hannah was the pinnacle of his acquisitions, the perfect partner to stand beside him. But a whisper from a trusted source, a seed of doubt planted just days before the crash, had prompted this elaborate theater. He needed to know what happened when the powerful lion was perceived as a helpless lamb. He felt the light pressure of her lips against his forehead, a kiss as cold and empty as a winter tomb. The charade continued. For days, Hannah was the picture of devotion. She would sit by his bed, reading from books she never finished, her voice a low, soothing murmur for the benefit of any nurse who entered. She would arrange flowers, their cloying scent filling the air, and speak to him of their future, a future she painted with broad, hollow strokes. Kazuo listened, cataloging every false endearment, every perfectly timed sigh. He learned the rhythm of her performance, the way her grip on his hand would tighten fractionally whenever the door opened, and slacken into careless indifference the moment it closed. She was an actress, and a talented one at that. But the audience she was playing for was far more astute than she could ever imagine. His stepbrother, Yudo, was her co-star in this grim production. He arrived with a performance of his own, his face etched with brotherly concern. "Any change, Hannah?" he would ask, his voice thick with false hope. "Nothing," she would reply, her tone dropping from sorrowful to clipped and impatient the second she was sure they were alone. "This is taking too long. The board is getting restless. His father is watching every move." Kazuo's stillness was his shield. Behind it, a cold fury began to solidify. Yudo, the weak, grasping boy he had always pitied and protected, was a vulture circling what he believed to be a corpse. "We need to move on the proxies," Yudo urged in a harsh whisper one afternoon, the sound cutting through the sterile hum of the medical equipment. His signature: "We have forgeries, but Takashi's lawyers are sharks. If we don't consolidate power now, it will all slip away." Hannah's reply was venomous. "Do you think I enjoy this? Playing the grieving fiancé to a block of ice? Every day I sit here is a day the fortune he promised me is tied up in legal limbo. Get it done, Yudo. Or all of this will have been for nothing." Their words were acid, dissolving the last vestiges of affection Kazuo might have held for either of them. He was not a man, he was an obstacle, an asset to be liquidated. It was on the third night that his world shifted. The scent of antiseptic and expensive, wilting lilies was replaced by something simple and clean, the faint fragrance of lavender soap. He heard a different sound, not the sharp click of heels but the soft, squeaking protest of rubber-soled shoes. A young woman entered the room, her presence a quiet melody in contrast to Hannah's screeching symphony. She was a night nurse, a girl so young she looked as if she should be studying for exams, not tending to the broken bodies of men like him. She wore simple, light blue scrubs, and her hair was pulled back in a neat braid. He felt her presence by the bed, a gentle warmth that did not demand or perform. She checked the monitors, her movements efficient and serene. Then, she did something unexpected. She pulled a chair close to his bed, not to keep a vigil, but simply to sit. For a long while, she was silent. Then, she spoke, her voice soft and low, a stark contrast to Hannah's theatrical whispers. "It must be loud in your head," she said, as if speaking to a friend. "Or maybe it's quiet. I wonder which is worse." She dipped a cloth into a basin of cool water, the sound of it splashing gently. She wrung it out, and he felt the delicate, cool touch of it on his forehead. Her touch was hesitant at first, then firm and reassuring as she wiped the day's tension from his face. "My grandmother always said a cool cloth and a quiet room could heal most anything that truly ails a person. Not the body, maybe, but the spirit." He had never experienced a touch so devoid of agenda. It was not the possessive touch of a lover, the sycophantic touch of an underling, or the clinical touch of a doctor. It was simply human. Kind. He could feel the calluses on her fingertips, the sign of a life of work, not of leisure. She began to hum, a simple, nameless tune that felt ancient and comforting. It was a lullaby for a broken world, and for a moment, the cold, calculating mind of Kazuo, the Oyabun of the Ishikawa Gumi, fell silent, and he simply listened. The next day, the vultures returned, their greed sharpened by impatience. Hannah's red dress seemed to bleed into the pristine white of the room, a garish stain of her ambition. Yudo paced like a caged animal, his charming facade stripped away to reveal the twitching, nervous creature beneath. "The old man is blocking us," Yudo hissed, forgoing any pretense of whispering. "Takashi has frozen the corporate accounts. He claims to be acting in Kazuo's best interest until he recovers." Hannah let out a sound of pure frustration, a noise ugly and raw. "Recovers? Look at him. He's a vegetable. A very, very wealthy vegetable, and that wealth belongs to me. To us. He promised me this life." Kazuo's mind, clear again after the quiet of the night, absorbed every word. He felt the phantom sensation of the cool cloth on his brow and contrasted it with the burning venom of their words. Hannah walked to the bed and stared down at his face, her expression one of utter contempt. "Do you know what I think, Kazuo?" she said to his still form. "I think you're in there. I think you can hear me. And I hope you are suffering, knowing that the empire you built with fear and blood is about to be mine. Your weakling brother, and I will run it into the ground, and we will dance on its ashes with your money." The cruelty was so pure, so absolute, it was almost breathtaking. It was a gift. It erased any lingering sentiment, any doubt. It armed him with a righteous, icy certainty. Yudo, ever the coward, looked nervous. "Hannah, don't. What if someone hears?" "Who?" she scoffed, gesturing around the empty, opulent room. "The nurses come and go. They see a tragic scene. They see what they are paid to see. No one cares about him. They were all just afraid of him." Her words were meant to be a final, damning verdict on his life. But in the darkness of his mind, a small, quiet voice countered her. One person cares. The girl with the lavender soap and the cool cloth. The one who had offered comfort for no reason at all. She had proven Hannah wrong without ever knowing she was part of a trial. That evening, a different presence filled the room. It was a power that dwarfed his own, an authority that needed no introduction. His father, Takashi, entered alone. He was an old lion, his hair the color of snow but his eyes as sharp and black as obsidian chips. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace that commanded the space around him. He dismissed the attending day nurse with a slight nod. He did not greet Kazuo or offer any false words of hope. He simply pulled a chair to the bedside, the same chair the young nurse had used, and sat in silence for a long time, his gaze fixed on his son's face. Kazuo felt that gaze like a physical weight, a pressure that was not judging but assessing, seeing straight through the deception to the core of the man beneath. Finally, Takashi spoke, his voice a low rumble, like distant thunder. "A snake sheds its skin only when it believes no one is watching," he said, his words cryptic and direct at once. "It is then you see its true form. pale and vulnerable, before the new skin hardens. He knew. Of course he knew. Kazuo had inherited his strategic mind from this man. Takashi had likely suspected the accident from the beginning and was allowing his son to play his hand. Takashi reached out and placed a large, warm hand on Kazuo's shoulder. The contact was grounding, a silent affirmation of strength and support. The Ishikawa-gumi is strong. Its roots are deep. A storm may break a few branches, but it cannot touch the heart of the tree if the trunk is sound. He was not just speaking of the organization. He was speaking of Kazuo himself. He was reminding him of his own strength, his own resilience. "When you are ready," Takashi said, rising to his feet, "uproot the weeds. Do not let them poison the soil." He paused at the door, his silhouette framed against the hallway light. "And learn the difference between a decorative vine and a tree that gives shade. One chokes the life from you for its own climb. The other asks for nothing." The words settled deep within Kazuo, a final piece of wisdom that locked his resolve into place. He was not just fighting for his empire anymore. He was fighting for a chance to understand what his father meant. The night brought her back. Chloe. He had learned her name from the chart she had left on the bedside table. It was a simple, gentle name that suited her. Tonight, she brought a small, potted plant with her, its leaves slightly withered and brown at the edges. She placed it on the windowsill, where it could catch the morning sun. "I found this one in the bin," she said softly, her voice filling the quiet room. "Someone gave up on it, but I think there's still some life in there. Just needs a little water, a little patience." She tended to her duties, checking the machines that kept his deception alive, her movements a familiar, comforting rhythm. Then, she returned to his side with the basin and cloth. The cool touch was a balm, extinguishing the lingering heat of Hannah's rage. As she gently cleaned his face, she spoke again, her words a simple, meandering stream of thought. "My mother loves plants. She says you can tell a lot about a person by how they treat something that can't give them anything back. Something that depends on them completely." Her simple philosophy was a blade that cut right to the heart of his situation. Hannah and Yuto saw him as a dependent thing, an object to be discarded. This girl, this stranger, saw a life worth tending to, just like the abandoned plant on the sill. "You just rest," she whispered, pulling the fine cashmere blanket up to his chin. The blanket was a gift from Hannah, a prop for her stage, but Chloe's touch imbued it with a genuine warmth it had never possessed before. "Everyone's fighting some kind of battle. It's okay to be tired. It's okay to just be still for a while. The world will still be here when you're ready to come back to it." In that moment, Kazuo felt a profound shift within him. The empire, the money, the fear he commanded, it all felt like a hollow shell. The only thing that felt real was the sincerity of this 18-year-old girl in her pale blue scrubs who offered him dignity when she believed he had none left. He was starting to understand his father's words. He had surrounded himself with decorative vines, and it had nearly cost him everything. The next day was a symphony of desperation. Hannah and Yuto arrived with a lawyer, a slick man whose smile didn't reach his eyes. They believed Takashi's interference was a temporary setback, a wall that could be dismantled with the right legal crowbar. Their voices were no longer whispers. They were the bold, arrogant tones of people who believed they had already won. "The incompetence clause is our best bet," the lawyer said, spreading documents across the visitor's table. "We get 2 more specialists to declare him permanently unresponsive. With your testimony as his fiancé and Yuto's as his brother, we can petition the court to grant you full medical and financial power of attorney." Hannah's laughter was a sharp, ugly sound. "Permanently unresponsive. I like the sound of that. It's so final." She walked over to the bed, the red dress a defiant flag of victory. She looked down at Kazuo, her eyes glittering with malice and triumph. "It's almost over, my love," she purred, the words dripping with saccharine poison. "Soon you won't have to worry about a thing. Yuto and I will take care of everything. Your legacy, your company, your bank accounts." Yuto, emboldened by the lawyer's presence, chimed in. "We'll be sure to send a generous donation to the hospital in your name, brother. For the excellent care they provided in your final days." They saw him as dead already. They were dancing on his grave before he was even in it. The sheer audacity of their betrayal was no longer enraging, it was clarifying. It burned away all emotion, leaving behind a core of pure, cold purpose. He had seen their true forms, just as his father had said. He had seen the pale, grasping creatures they were beneath their polished skins. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that their reign was about to come to a very sudden, very final end. The performance was over. It was time for the curtain to rise on the final act. That night, Chloe was quieter than usual. She performed her tasks with the same gentle efficiency, but a small frown creased her brow. As she changed the 4-bag, she paused, her eyes lingering on his hand where it rested on the blanket. Kazuo, in his deepest state of controlled stillness, had allowed the smallest of tremors, a flicker of a finger, an involuntary twitch he had not suppressed. It was a minuscule sign of life, a crack in the facade. Hana and Yudo, in their self-absorbed greed, would never have noticed. But Chloe noticed everything. She didn't gasp or call for a doctor. She simply finished her task and then came to his side. She didn't touch him. She just stood there, watching his face with an intensity that felt as if she were peering directly into his soul. "I see you," she whispered, the words so soft they were barely a breath. "I don't know what you're waiting for, or what you're hiding from, but I see you in there." Her perception was unnerving, and yet deeply comforting. She wasn't fooled by the medical charts or the specialist reports. She saw the person, the spirit trapped within the shell. "My grandmother used to tell me that sometimes people build walls so high they forget how to open the door," she continued, her voice a soothing balm. "But there's always a door. You just have to be ready to walk through it." She reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from his forehead. It was an impossibly tender gesture, an act of pure, uncomplicated humanity. "You can come back when you're ready," she said, her voice full of a simple, unwavering faith. "There's good in the world still. I promise." Her promise, so simple and so profound, was the final push he needed. He wasn't coming back for revenge, not solely. He was coming back for that promise. He was coming back to a world where a person like Chloe existed. He would open the door. And he would bring the storm with him. The morning light streamed into the room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Hana and Yudo stood with their lawyer, the final documents in their hands, their faces alight with triumphant greed. Hana, wearing the same blood-red dress as if it were a uniform of conquest, held the pen like a scepter. "A toast," Yudo said, raising an imaginary glass. "To a new era, to us," Hana corrected, her smile sharp and predatory. She leaned over the bed, the document held aloft in one hand, ready to stage a final, poignant scene of her signing away the life of the man she supposedly loved. She brought her face close to his, her perfume cloying and suffocating. "Goodbye, Kazuo," she whispered, her breath hot against his ear. It was profitable as she straightened up, ready to sign. A voice, quiet and laced with steel, cut through the room. "That's enough." The voice was raspy from disuse, but it held an undeniable core of absolute authority. Hana froze, the pen hovering over the paper. Yudo's face went slack, all color draining from it. The lawyer's professional smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure shock. Slowly, deliberately, Kazuo's eyes opened. They were not the dull, unfocused eyes of a man emerging from a coma. They were the sharp, piercing eyes of a predator who had watched his prey walk willingly into a trap. He looked directly at Hana, his gaze so cold it seemed to freeze the very air she breathed. Her composure, so carefully constructed, shattered into a million pieces. The pen clattered from her nerveless fingers. "You," she stammered, her voice a strangled squeak. "You were awake." Kazuo's gaze shifted to Yudo, who visibly shrank, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. "Every word," Kazuo said, his voice gaining strength. "Every whisper, every lie." He pushed himself up, sitting on the edge of the bed. The movement was fluid, powerful, showing no sign of the invalid he had pretended to be. The power dynamic in the room didn't just shift, it inverted with explosive force. Two large men in dark suits entered the room silently, having been waiting in the hall for his signal. "Hannah," Kazuo said, his tone flat and final. "You will leave with nothing but the dress on your back. Consider it a parting gift." He then turned to his stepbrother. "Yudo, you are no longer my brother. You are nothing to me. You will be prosecuted for conspiracy and fraud. My father's lawyers will be thorough." The collapse was total. Hannah let out a sob of fury and disbelief as one of the men took her arm. Yudo simply crumpled, his face a mask of pathetic terror. They were escorted out, their grand ambitions reduced to a humiliating exit. The room was suddenly, blessedly silent. The silence that followed was profound. It was not the sterile, tense silence of the preceding weeks, but a clean, peaceful quiet. The scent of Hannah's perfume lingered faintly, a ghost of her treachery, but soon the clean, antiseptic smell of the hospital reclaimed the space. Kazuo remained on the edge of the bed, the cashmere blanket pulled around his waist. He felt the weariness not of a man who had been injured, but of a man who had carried a terrible weight. He had won, but the victory felt somber. He had rooted out the poison, but the act had required him to become poison himself, for a time. He had confirmed the worst in people he had once professed to love. Later that evening, the door opened softly. Chloe entered, carrying her small watering can for the plant on the windowsill. She stopped dead when she saw him sitting up, her eyes wide with shock. For a moment, she was speechless. Then a slow, radiant smile spread across her face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated joy. "You're back," she said softly. "I knew you were in there." He watched her as she went about her routine, her presence a calming anchor in the sea of his turbulent thoughts. She watered the little plant, her movements as gentle and caring as ever. She came to his bedside to check the monitors, which were now mostly redundant. "I guess you won't be needing these anymore," she said with a small laugh. "No," he said, his voice still a little rough. "I won't." He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time without the veil of his deception. He saw the kindness in her dark eyes, the strength in her young face, the quiet dignity in her posture. She had expected nothing from him, and in doing so, had given him everything that mattered. "Thank you," he said. The words felt inadequate, small pebbles against the mountain of his gratitude. She just nodded, accepting his thanks with the same simple grace she did everything else. "What is your name?" he asked, though he already knew. He wanted to hear her say it. He wanted it to be the first truth in his new life. "Chloe," she replied. "My name is Chloe." "Chloe," he repeated, the name feeling solid and real on his tongue. "I'm Kazuo," she smiled again. "I know." And so, we learned that the greatest empires are not built of steel and stone, but of trust and truth. We see that the loudest declarations of love can be the most empty, while the quietest acts of kindness can hold the most profound power. True strength is not the ability to command fear, but the courage to be vulnerable. For in the end, a life measured in power and possessions is a hollow kingdom, but a life measured in moments of genuine human connection is a treasure beyond any price. The world is full of those who will see you only for what you have, but the ones to cherish are those who see you for who you are, especially when you have nothing left to offer but yourself.